video, I'm going to share some of the money tips that have worked for us as a family that deals with pretty severe ADHD. ADHD can really affect how you handle your money, and it can lead to a lot of financial problems for people. ADHD does this because it affects your executive functioning, and executive functioning is the mental processes that allow you to focus, plan, execute that plan, remember important details, and control your impulses. Obviously, all of those things are usually really important in managing your money. So if ADHD affects those things, it can lead to overspending, forgotten bills, late payments, all sorts of money management problems. There's research that also suggests people with ADHD have either avoidant or spontaneous decision-making skills, which means they either completely postpone or avoid making financial decisions and managing their money, or they're out there impulse spending and unable to control how money is leaving their bank account, leaving them broke and full of shame and embarrassment. There are a lot of different flavors of ADHD, and it can affect your money in different ways, from forgetting to pay bills and having late payments to choosing short-term rewards over long-term rewards like saving for retirement and saving for a house, having trouble getting organized with your bills, so you are forgetting payments, you're getting things cut off because you haven't made payments, having trouble organizing all the paperwork that comes with your finances, struggling to focus when you're trying to make a plan and improve things, having trouble remembering that plan and putting it into action, and then also impulse buying and making poor decisions with your spending because you don't have that impulse control. It can also go the other way, where you hyper fixate on your finances to an unhealthy degree. There are a lot of different ways that ADHD shows up in money management, but the one thing that I've learned is that admitting that your brain is different and handles things differently is the first step. It's okay that your brain works differently and those things can be a problem for you. Just admitting it and acknowledging it can help a lot, because you know that it's not a moral failing. It's not something that you have to feel so much shame and embarrassment about. It's because your brain works differently, and a lot of the money tips out there are not for neurodivergent brains. They are for people that have their mind together and have their shit together. Let's be honest. A lot of the money advice out there is not for people that have ADHD or a neurodivergent brain. It's for everyone else. And you may have tried a lot of the money advice out there. You might have tried to follow some of the money gurus out there, and it just didn't work for you, and you feel a lot of shame and embarrassment about that. Let it go. The first thing to do is realize that getting yelled at by someone that handles money differently than you isn't a sign that you're going to be bad at money. It just means that you need a different system. So now that we have that out of the way, let's get into the actual practical tips that have helped me and my husband manage our money a little bit better with ADHD. So the first thing is to set up autopay for every single bill if possible. Making sure that everything is automated means that we are less likely to forget it, and it means that we're less likely to put a bill that comes into email or via paper into a sort and file pile that never gets looked at again and then is late or not paid. So definitely put as many bills as possible onto autopay and make sure that they are automated so that you're not forgetting anything. Second thing that we have done and found a lot of success with is having two different checking accounts, having a checking bills account. So this is the account that everything autopay comes out of. So if it comes out via ACH, comes out of the bill pay checking account. If it is a bill that you pay via credit card, your credit card balance is only used for bills, and then the bill pay checking account pays off that credit card every week or every 2 weeks or every month, depending on what works for you. So basically every bill is automated, so you're not missing anything, and then every bill is paid for out of one single account that is not used for anything else except for bill pay. This has worked really well for us. Having everything possible on autopay has worked so well, and I'll be honest, even last month I got a paper bill and it was something that wasn't set up on auto payment, and I forgot about it. I put it on my desk to pay later, and a month went by and my husband was like, oh yeah, did you pay that? And I did not. I forgot about it because it was still on the table. Luckily, that was not something that had a late fee because it was car tags, but I forgot to pay it. I was late because it got put in a pile and I forgot about it. So having as much as possible on automated bill pay will eliminate some of those situations, and then we can talk about the other things you can do for the paper things we might forget. So having a bill pay only account has worked really well for us. So we have two checking accounts, and the second one is a spending account. This spending account is for all of our weekly spending. spending. It is for gas, it is for groceries, it is for anything our kids need, it is for anything miscellaneous that comes up. This is an account we both have access to and we both have debit cards for. We have found over the years having an account that we can spend down to zero works really well for some people with ADHD. It's not for everyone, not everyone needs that, but some people just, no matter how much is in an account, will spend it down to zero. And if that is you, having a certain account set aside that is where you can do that is really helpful. Just accepting that your brain does this and giving yourself a guardrail by having a weekly set amount, and once it's gone, but it replenishes, can be really helpful. I will say this also works really well if you're anti-budget and you want to separate out your accounts and not have a budget. This can be a good system for that as well. But giving yourself those guidelines and guardrails so that you're not overspending, but you're allowed to spend down to pretty much like zero, can work really well. Speaking of separate accounts, also having your savings account separate can be very helpful. If you are trying to save up for a big goal like an emergency fund or saving for a car or for a house, having your savings account at a different bank than your checking account can be very helpful for people with ADHD. This is because you can automate it. So you can set up an automation where it goes from your checking account straight to savings, straight from your bill pay checking to your savings, automated, and then you don't look at it. This is honestly the only way some people with ADHD can save money, by having it somewhere they're not constantly seeing it. So if it's attached to your checking account, you might just move money back over every single time that you feel like you need money or you spend down to zero. But when it's in a separate bank that you aren't looking at constantly, this can pile up and grow, and you're not constantly going to be pulling money from it. This has worked really, really well for us, specifically with things like saving for a house. That money is at a different high yield savings account at a different bank. And that's why we use different bank accounts, because having it all in one bank, all in one account especially, did not work for us. It just got moved back into our checking account and then spent. So if you have trouble saving, open up a high yield savings account at a different bank. I will leave some links for ones that I like in the description box, and then set up an automation so that money is moving every single time you get paid to that savings account. Then don't look at it, don't touch it, and don't have a debit card or any way to access that money. It has to stay in that bank account until it piles up, until it's something that you are ready to use, like an emergency fund, or when you're ready to actually purchase a car or a house or something like that. Automating savings and keeping it separate has been a huge thing for us, and something that I have found a lot of people that talk about money and ADHD reference. So keeping it separate and automating your savings to that account, really helpful. Try it out. So those are some really practical ways that you can set up like bank accounts to help you out, and automations. Most banks can automate this kind of savings, and it is so helpful. Now let's talk about some of the other stuff that can really affect your ADHD and money management together. And the first is paper bills. Like I said before, I still forget bills sometimes because I am a piles person, and if it gets put in the wrong pile or a pile that I just kind of forget about over time, it can be paid late. So what I do is, usually when I'm doing well, I make sure that I write paid on everything that comes through that is paper. And then once a week, I do have an alarm to look at it, but sometimes I ignore it. So when you do get paper bills, when you pay them, write paid on it. And then set up an alarm every single week or some other system. Make sure that you are checking weekly your pile of things that have come through that you need to handle. So those papers and admin tasks that you need to take care of, having a time to do those and forcing yourself to do them is really helpful. And then writing paid, so that if you go through bills just really quickly, you can see this one's been paid, this one's been paid, this one has not. If it doesn't have paid on it, you know it's not. So I actually do this on every single thing that comes through paper-wise, so I know that I have paid it. I write paid and the date so that I know just at a quick glance that it's been paid or not. And then I can handle the ones that I haven't done. And usually this works well as long as I'm sticking with my weekly consistent action of going through all my paperwork. That can be a problem. So one thing that can work with that is body doubling. So body doubling is something I didn't know about until more recently, but it's basically where you are doing a task with someone that is also doing the same task. And people with ADHD really thrive with this system. If you're trying to do something alone, it can sometimes be really hard. But if someone is doing the same thing, if you're both cleaning at the same time, it's so much easier. And if you are both working on your piles of stuff to go through, it's a lot easier. So body doubling, when you need to do things like admin tasks or manage your money or check your budget, things like that, can be very, very helpful. If you have have a partner, you can do it with them. If you have a friend that you are both on the same journey with, you can do it with them. If you don't have someone in your life that you can do it with, you could pick like a YouTuber that does weekly videos. That was really something people were doing with Transfer Tuesday, which I didn't realize until recently. And that was kind of helpful to have someone working on their money at the same time, because that allows your brain to kind of focus in and do the same thing. So body doubling can really help if you have ADHD and you need to like make yourself weekly check in on your budget or pay all your paper bills, things like that. Along the same lines as body doubling, you can join a group that talks about money. So like a money support group, not necessarily a like coaching program or anything, but just people that are talking about money and doing the same thing that you're doing. If it's ADHD specific, that's great. If it's not, it still helps to be in a group where people are working on the same goal of being better with money. And so this might be a Facebook group, it might be like a Discord, it might be like a membership. It really just depends on what you can find and what works for you. But being in a group setting where people are working on the same goal can be really helpful because it's good reminders. There are people working on the same things. You might learn tips that you didn't know before. So that's an option as well. If you are having trouble getting organized with your money and you have ADHD, one thing that really helps is visual cues. I realized recently that the reason why visual stuff works for me is because of that. So I've always been a paper budgeter. I like to write things out and I like to see it before I use any other system to track my spending. And that is because paper and pen really work well for people with ADHD. It's honestly like the best way to do it for our brains. So writing it out can be really helpful. If you're using an app or any other sort of system like a spreadsheet or whatever, having it be really simple is key. I recently started using spreadsheets, but I made sure that they were as simple as possible while still tracking what I needed to track, and keeping things simple is key. Once it gets overly complicated, that is where it loses a lot of people with ADHD, because that need to focus and to learn a new system and to enter so many different things and do so many different tasks can just put us off. So we avoid, and we don't look at it and we just avoid. So keeping your system simple is really helpful, and keeping it visual is super, super helpful. So things like savings trackers, savings challenges, budgeting where you can see it, and most importantly, a financial calendar. So pretty much everything I ever put out there for products has a calendar in it, because that is so helpful if you have ADHD. Having one that you can repeat every single month where it shows when bills are due, just so you can check it off like, oh yes, that auto paid, that auto paid. Oh, that's not an auto pay, I need to pay that. Having it visual where you can see it laid out is very, very helpful when you're trying to manage your money and you're struggling because you don't know when things are due, you can't see it. So try a calendar, put your bills on there, put like whenever you have something that costs money in the month, like if you're going to dinner, you're paying for an extra yoga class, things like that, put it on the calendar. It helps so much. Okay, now let's talk about spending and ADHD. This is where a lot of people really struggle, I think, and that is because it really affects your impulse control with ADHD, and people that have an ADHD diagnosis are 4 times more likely to impulse spend than people that do not have ADHD. So it's a scientifically proven thing that people with ADHD are more likely to impulse spend. That means you have to set up things to help with this. One thing you can do is to make a list when you are going to the store, the grocery store, or do things like pickup where you make the list and you have it on your computer and you don't actually go in the store. So you don't give yourself the option to go in and spend extra. This is something that works for me. For my husband, he likes to go into stores almost every day. So making a list and doing that doesn't really work for him. So you kind of have to figure out what works for you and where you can control your spending. For him, it is setting a limit that is a physical limit. So this means a certain amount of money in his personal spending account that renews every so often, every week for us. So he knows he has that much money. He can go to the store every single day if he wants. He can go once a week. He can go whenever he wants. He has this set amount of money. When it's gone, it's gone. It is what it is. For some people, that can look like the cash envelope system. I personally don't like cash and I never have, so I don't use cash, but cash envelopes can really help if you have a spending problem and you have ADHD, because you have that certain amount of cash and when it's gone, it's gone. So when you're shopping, that's all you have. You can spend that cash and then it's gone, and you have to wait until it renews and you put more in. That does work for some people. I personally was never really good at the cash system because it requires you to get cash out every single week and then put it in your envelopes again. And guess what? For me, I did not have a great time remembering to get cash out and remembering to put in my envelopes and remembering to bring my envelopes to the store. So for me, that wasn't a great system. You kind of have to find what worked for you, and there is trial and error in this. Figuring out which system works for you and works with your type of ADHD ADHD and your specific problems can take some work. And there's going to be some times where you completely mess up. And a lot of people have a lot of shame and embarrassment when that happens, when they overspend, when they charge too much on their credit cards, when they go into debt because they're just not spending correctly. Let that go and realize that this is just something you have to figure out by trying different things, trying different methods. There are different methods. There's not one right method for everyone, and just figuring out what works for you is what matters. So be aware of impulse spending and also be aware of aspirational spending. I find that people with ADHD have a problem with aspirational spending, which is where you're buying things to create the best version of yourself, but you're not there yet. So it's things like buying snowboarding gear when you don't have a trip planned and you don't live anywhere near there and you are not a snowboarder. So it's buying things that you think you'll get to, you think you'll have a hobby for, you think will make you a better person. So maybe you buy like a Ninja blender when you think, oh, I'm going to be super healthy and drink all these smoothies, and you've never made a smoothie in your life, but you just went and spent a ton of money on all this stuff to make smoothies for this really healthy best version of yourself. That is a really common problem, and I think that being aware of it is helpful, and being realistic about what is actually for you versus the aspirational version of you can help a lot, because you're just being aware of it does help some. So you have to watch out for impulse spending, aspirational spending, just so many different things. One thing that can help with this is having a certain amount of money set aside to be spontaneous with. If you know that this is going to come up at some point during the month, give yourself a little bit of money for it. $50, $100, whatever it is, that's set aside just to blow on something that is impulsive or maybe aspirational. It really doesn't matter, but it wasn't planned. It's not necessary. Give yourself a little bit of money for that, so that way you don't feel bad when it does happen, because you have that money set aside. It was earmarked for this purpose. And then the final one that I have found in our relationship that works really well is having our own personal spending accounts, because we do have different kind of versions of ADHD. We both handle money very differently. And in our relationship, we talk about money a lot, and we have tried to figure out the best ways to handle spending specifically. And what's worked for us is having personal accounts that are just our individual accounts, and then every single week we have a certain amount of money that goes to those accounts. It's very similar to our joint spending account, where those accounts can be spent down to zero if they want to be. If that's how you like to handle money, go for it. For us, we do that very differently. I don't do that, my husband does, but we both have very different ways of handling money, and having those separate personal accounts has worked really well for us. So I think that's it on the money tips that I have kind of figured out and found work for us with ADHD. Not all of this will work for you, and maybe you don't need any of this, but it's just something that has worked for us as we've tried to figure out handling money with ADHD to prevent money fights and prevent going back into debt, and to live a life that is more financially sound so that we can eventually hit financial freedom, even with our neurospicy brains and the struggle with executive functioning. If you struggle with ADHD and money, let me know what tips have worked for you in the comments. I would love to hear about it, and I'm sure everyone would benefit from your expertise as well. If you found this interesting, subscribe to Pennies Not Perfection. I will have more videos about money and ADHD coming soon. Until then, definitely watch this video.